Okay, Greek mythology. This is one I've been asked about for a long time, and I've kind of been putting it off. I think a lot of people are interested in how the polytheistic religions can possibly fit into the Omnist construct, as it were, because I think it's a little easier to imagine religions that believe in a very wide deity and the concept of God, the monotheistic God, or the more panentheistic God or pantheistic God, because it's such a wide concept that you can see where it might all be the same thing. But what do you do with the Greeks, who have all these different gods, the Romans, who essentially just took the Greek gods and named them something different, the Norse gods, the Egyptian gods? Again, this comes back to the way that Omnism views religions, which is obviously from a somewhat more abstract, metaphoric way. To me, the Greeks were really intriguing because they still lived in a time when philosophy and science and religion were still all the same thing, and it's why I was so fascinated with them as a kid, and continue to be fascinated with them. To me, what they were really doing in their religion, and there is more than one way to take this, you know, everything can kind of mean 10 different things, but to me what they were doing is, first of all, I think a lot of people, when they think of the Greek gods, they just think of the lower gods, the Olympic pantheon. And were there ever really gods running around the earth, you know, throwing lightning bolts at each other? I have no idea. Maybe 10,000 years ago, back when supposedly gods and men were still kind of on equal footing, something really existed. Perhaps there were some sort of creatures, you know, maybe Neanderthals or whatever that we Homo sapiens looked up to, and maybe it was some basis for this kind of thought. I have no idea. I'm not going to conjecture on it. Who knows? Maybe they were aliens. You know, certainly you'll have people who will get into the whole Anunnaki idea, even though, frankly, well, anyway, I won't get into that right now. But the way I tend to look at the way the Greeks looked at everything was that it was really a way of deconstructing reality. You see, while we did have what I might call lower gods, the more human gods, the more anthropomorphized gods, Zeus and Apollo and Athena and Hermes, etc., etc., they were the ones that I think people most related to. They were the ones who actually went around having sex with each other and killing people and doing incredibly human, silly, stupid things. But above them, of course, you had the Titans, who was another pantheon before the Olympians, and above that you had your older gods, your primordial gods, like Gaia, Mother Earth, and Father Sky, and Kronos, not to be confused with the father of Zeus, but different spelling of Kronos, which was time. Kronos is time. You had eternal time, which was a concept above time, beyond time rather. It referred to all of time outside what we would think of as time. And Ion was a really interesting figure. Often he's associated with Eros, which is interesting because Eros is often thought of as being of the Greek pantheon, but sometimes he was of the Greek pantheon, I'm sorry, the Olympic pantheon. Sometimes he was from the primordial pantheon, and I think this sort of speaks to the way Greeks saw love, and the different ways in which they anthropomorphized love. Which is also interesting because since Ion can kind of be looked at as the big God beyond God, or perhaps the God just beyond the God beyond God, depending how you want to look at that, you could say that God was love, quite literally. And I always thought that was kind of funny. It's just a little bit of a mythology joke there. But beyond all of that, you had chaos, and everything really came from chaos. Chaos was this huge black void from which everything sprang. And again, in the Greek thought, you did have this cosmic egg concept, where the cosmic egg comes out of chaos and is split apart by the primordial gods. And here you have an image that's very similar to what we now call the Big Bang. The Greeks had these concepts thousands of years before we'd ever even thought of them. And what I find so wonderful about that is that all of these great concepts like the atom, they had the concept of the atom before they had any even remote way of studying the building blocks of the universe. They were able to reason all of these things before we had any way of studying it. They were coming up with the fact that the world was round and all kinds of highly way before their time concepts. And back in a time when the thinkers were still thinking religiously and philosophically and scientifically all at the same time. I'm not one of these people that thinks that, oh, that I don't think of the Greeks as being these primitive religious people from whom science somehow managed to dribble out. No, they were incredibly brilliant. And I think they were brilliant because they still looked at everything as a whole. They were still studying the universe and all of reality as a whole. And to me, what happened is they had the concept of chaos. They had the concept of a something beyond something beyond something. But then in order to break it down, in order to make it simpler, they did create the primordial gods, through which they could study reality on a somewhat more split apart basis. You know, they could study time and eternal time and the sky and the earth and love, which obviously is a huge concept. And then they could break it down further and further and further with all of these smaller gods who represented all these different facets of the world, war and anger and learning and wisdom and sort of anthropomorphized the things that you and I experience in everyday life, and then sort of put them into code, put them into metaphor. Said that all the major things that happened in the world happened because of these gods' interactions. Were those literal? Well, I think that would very much depend on which Greek you were speaking to. Some of them obviously thought of them quite literally. I have the feeling that the Olympic pantheon, the most human of these gods, were probably the ones that, because people related to them the most, they did the most sacrificing to them. They talked about them the most, had the most to do with them. But when you really get into Greek thought, it's tremendously more complex than simply this belief that there were a bunch of big guys wearing togas throwing lightning bolts at each other. Guys like Sir Isaac Newton, probably one of the most amazing thinkers in history, believed that all of these myths were actually codes for alchemical processes, for processes of the universe, and seems to have proved some of those. He believed that all the different gods represented different elements, which of course is pretty common in alchemical thought, and by combining them in the way that they occurred in various myths, it would create certain chemical processes, and some of those seem to have worked for him. He put all of that down in many of his coded writings. I'll talk about Newton in another video. But there's a lot of different ways of looking at Greek mythology. And I think, to me, the very base level of looking at Greek mythology is this concept that there were these godlike beings that used to exist. That could be true. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying that thousands of years ago there weren't some weird pantheons that used to run around the earth and maybe people based gods on them. I have no idea. Like I said, I'm not going to try to conjecture on that. But I do tend to see it in somewhat more metaphorical terms. Does that mesh in with all other religions? Yes, of course it does. Because again, it is simply a way of looking at this huge universe and putting labels on it. It is really the way that I see all of religion. It's what we do. It's what we do as humans. That's almost what you might call one of the major components of what makes us human is that we label things. We are the creatures put into this universe in whatever way in order to label it, in order to tell it what it is. And that is sort of what we do with all these religions. We take the whole sum of everything and we put all these labels on it. And it's what we continue to do. Here in science, it's the exact same thing that we do. We label everything. We label the processes of the universe and give them names. And by giving them names, we simplify them. And to some extent, we understand them. Of course, I also believe in an ultimately complex universe. Or should I say an ever-complex universe. In other words, every time we figure something out, there's always something underneath it, or always something above it, depending on how you want to look at that. There's always another layer to the onion. And we're definitely finding that to be true right now. We really thought that we pretty much understood the universe 100 years ago, just through the laws of thermodynamics. But, you know, then we discovered all kinds of other things, namely, you know, relativity and quantum physics, where suddenly the universe got much more complex instantaneously. So I guess I guess in closing, and all, I know that probably sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but in closing, that is the way I see the polytheistic religions, like the Greeks and the Romans and the Norse and the Egyptians, all of those. Simply being this way of looking at reality, labeling reality, considering it, and being able to study it through metaphor, through myth, through combining it in different ways. If that remotely answers the question, if not, please add in some more comments underneath this video, and I'll do my best to answer it a little more precisely. I'm the Urban Omnist. I'll see you guys later. And remember, guys, none of this works without you. So, subscribe to our channel, like us on Facebook and Twitter, and above all, don't forget to send me those questions.